in a PIN. If a PIN expires in the number of days, and if we're going to keep a PIN history, if we're going to allow for PIN recovery, the use of TPM on the box, and if we're going to allow for biometric authentication. Are we going to use enhanced anti-spoofing? Are we going to allow for certificates? Right? You can also configure Hello for Business settings in the device enrollment policies in Intune. And so that's going to enforce similar configuration settings during device enrollment to Intune. Now, what if we're using group policy? Right? Well, group policy is a way that we can administer and manage our Intune environment, or our Hello for Business environment as well. So you're going to need at least a Windows 10 or later workstation to run the GPMC, and then that GPMC will have the latest Hello for Business and PIN complexity group policy settings. You must configure the enable Windows Hello for Business group policy setting for Windows to allow a user to attempt to enroll in Hello for Business. A user can only attempt enrollment if the policy setting is set at enabled. So you can configure that enable Hello for Business group policy setting for computers or for users, depending on how you're going to deploy. If you're going to do a pilot deployment, just to do some testing, then we recommend selecting a group of users and then deploying that group policy to that group. Note that if user and computer policy settings are deployed, then the user policy settings will have precedence because it's closer to the user. Now you'll go into group policy, under policies, user configuration, under administrative templates, Windows components, and choose Hello for Business, Windows Hello for Business. And then you can set that setting to hello, or to enable, not to hello. It's still early, brain's warming up. But you can also configure the options for certificates, other policy settings that can be configured as well. And so there's a lot of them that are set for the computer-based settings as well. Okay. Now, Windows Hello for Business certificates. Okay, now that's an authentication credential used in certificate-based Windows Hello for Business deployments. That certificate, that's going to be that digital identity for a user or device that's issued by a trusted certificate authority or a CA within an organization's PKI, or public key infrastructure. So when a user does attempt to authenticate, Hello for Business certificate is presented to verify the identity. The system checks the certificate's validity against the issuing CA. Now, using a Hello for Business certificate has a lot of benefits. For example, enhanced security through strong cryptographic mechanisms, easier management of user credentials, and even seamless integration with an existing PKI infrastructure. So it does allow organizations to take advantage of passwordless authentication while still maintaining high levels of security and compliance. Now, Microsoft also has a service known as Entra Identity Protection. Okay? So besides protecting your resources like devices and documents and other critical types of data, it is necessary to protect the identities. Right? That's how people get to documents and other critical types of data, is through their identity. So we really need to make sure that we're protected. Note that Microsoft Entra Identity Protection is a feature of Entra Premium P2 license. Okay? Entra Premium P2 license. And it's targeted at users of Microsoft 365 and other cloud services. But Entra ID Protection provides you with the ability to proactively recognize any security risks and identify vulnerabilities in your organization. It also allows for you to automatically apply responses and actions when suspicious activity on one or more identities is detected, and to allow for properly investigating incidents and taking actions to resolve them. Now, note, you shouldn't consider Entra ID Protection as one more reporting and monitoring utility. See, with this, you can also define risk policies with clearly defined actions that can be taken manually or automatically. So Entra ID protection monitors each user session that authenticates on any of your cloud resources and calculates a potential risk. And that risk is based on the user's location, the application used to authenticate, the device the user is using, and other sorts of factors. So for example, Entra ID protection can detect if the same user tries to authenticate from two distant geographic locations in a short period of time. Also, it can detect if a user tries to authenticate from a location where he or she has never authenticated before. Okay, so a lot of AI and machine learning running in the background to learn behaviors of users. Now, based on a calculated risk, Entra ID protection can notify administrators. It could try to remediate the risk. It can increase the authentication security requirements. For example, hey, you need to sign in with MFA, right? Or take some other action that's defined in policy. Now, the sign-in risk level can be low and above, medium and above, and high. And so for each risk level, you define some actions like requiring MFA or requiring a password change or even saying you are blocked. Now, Microsoft Entra Protection, ID Protection, does provide you with a dashboard where you can monitor in real time which users are flagged for risk, how many risk events have happened, and the potential for vulnerabilities in your organization. Another really helpful tool is the self-service password reset capability. Self-service password reset. So when you use only on-prem ADDS, your users can't on their own reset their forgotten passwords by themselves, right? And so ADDS in Windows Server doesn't natively support self-service password reset. Well, with Entra ID, it optionally provides the self-service password reset functionality, or SSPR. So if you use Microsoft Entra ID P1 or P2, you can extend that functionality for self-service password reset back to your local ADDS when you use the self-service password reset together with the password write-back functionality. Now, when you do this, passwords that users reset in Entra ID are written back to ADDS on-prem, meaning a user can change his or her password in both the cloud or on-prem environment. Now, before your users start to use self-service password reset, you have to enable that functionality in the Azure portal by selecting the password reset item in your directory tenant administration pane. Okay, so you have to get that turned on, but first you should decide if this functionality will be enabled for everybody or for just a small or select group of users. Note that during a pilot phase, it would be a good idea to target this to a smaller group of users. But this self-service password reset functionality does require that you define alternative methods of authentication for users that have forgotten their password, such as an office phone or mobile phone, alternative email address, or security questions. So you must choose how many authentication methods the user must have defined in order to be able to reset their password as well. So for phone and alternative email options, the user is provided with a security PIN over the phone or in an email message that they can use as the authentication method before resetting their password. If you choose to use security questions, you have to define the number of the questions that are required for each user, and you must also predefine the question pool. We do recommend that you offer at least 10 to 15 available questions and that you require each user to register at least 4 questions for password reset functionality. Note that if you don't like the predefined set of pool of questions, you can also define your own questions in your local language. But when you refine the requirements for the authentication methods, you should configure options for the self-service password reset functionalities, deployment, and usage. It is recommended that you require all users to register their alternative authentication methods the next time they sign in, and also to confirm their authentication methods at least twice a year. So this ensures that each user is able to verify their identity by using some alternative method. Also, if you have directory synchronization implemented, you should consider enabling the password write back functionality, just to make sure that passwords that users reset using SSPR are written back to ADDS. So users can register for SSPR functionality by using the Entra application portal. They can also use the portal to change their password, set up other alternative methods of verifying their identity as well. And if users forget their password when accessing a cloud-based resource, like getting into Microsoft 365, they can choose can't access your account in order to start the password reset capability. Now, what about multi-factor authentication? Multi-factor authentication. Well, MFA does give an additional layer of security, right? It requires more than one method of authentication to detect and validate a user's identity. So users still require usernames and passwords to sign in, but you can add yet another access method as a second method of authentication. And MFA technology combines something that you know, like a password or a PIN, with something that you have, like a phone or a token, or even something that you are, like a fingerprint or a face scan, right? Biometric technologies. So you can implement multi-factor authentication in different ways based on user demands and the level of extra security that they need. So there are a few different ways that this can be done. One of them is by using the Microsoft Authenticator mobile app. That can act as a software token to provide one-time passwords or receive push notifications on that application. You can also authenticate using a phone call. You can authenticate using text messages if you wanted to. And you can also use third-party OAuth tokens. Now, Microsoft Entra MFA helps to safeguard access to data and applications, yet still maintaining simplicity for users. It does provide extra security by requiring that second form of authentication and will deliver strong authentication via a range of easy-to-use authentication methods, right? Like we just talked about. Note that MFA comes as part of a Microsoft Entra P1 or P2 license. So this is a full-featured use of Microsoft Entra MFA or Azure MFA. But Microsoft Entra MFA is an option that's recommended for new deployments. Okay? You also have MFA for Microsoft 365, and this is going to be a subset of Entra MFA capabilities. It's part of your subscription. And then Microsoft Entra Global Administrators, and once again, a subset of Microsoft Entra MFA capabilities as a means to protect your GAs, right, in their accounts. Now, if you do have Entra P1 or P2 or EMS licenses, right, then you already have Entra multi-factor authentication. Organization doesn't need to do anything else in order to extend two-step verification capability to all your users. Okay, just assign a license to the user, and then you can turn on MFA. Now, when you do set up MFA, consider these things, right? Don't create a per authentication multi-factor authentication provider. See, if you do, you could end up paying for verification requests from users that already have licenses. Also, if you don't have enough licenses for all your users, well, then you can create a per user MFA provider to cover the rest of the organization. Also, Entra Connect is only required if you're synchronizing your on-prem Active Directory with Entra, right? So when thinking about MFA, then if you've got Entra Connect, hey, then that could be something to think about for your on-prem users as well. Now, MFA can be turned on a single user. If you're in Entra, under all users, go to MFA and then turn on MFA. So MFA is a really helpful feature for your users to help protect their identities. And that's what we've been talking about, right? Is making sure that identities are protected. Okay. Now we're going to dig into enabling organizational access, how to get into stuff, right? How to get into stuff. And so let's talk about this now. So we're going to describe how clients can be configured to access organizational resources using things like VPN. And you'll notice that we have what's known as an always on VPN as well. Always on. And so we'll take a look at those particular features now. And so when we look at enabling access to organization resources, if we're using something like a Server 2016 or later, or Windows 10 clients or later, hopefully you're using Windows 11 by now, there are several ways to access your local network infrastructure when you're outside of the network. So traditional ways to access the internal network is utilize a VPN. And so Windows Server has a remote access server role that can actually be configured as a server that terminates and even routes VPN connections. So Windows Server has that particular role, and in Windows environments, those VPN connections were mostly established on demand and based on things like PPTP, right? The point-to-point tunneling protocol, the layer 2 tunneling protocol, or L2TP, or even SSTP, right? Secure Sockets tunneling protocol. But you can also choose other ways to access internal resources from outside or publish internal resources on external networks like the internet. Well, in Server 2016 and later, you can find several services that you can use to make those internal resources available to those on the outside. Right? So we've got things like work folders and other sorts of things. But in order to make life easier for VPNs to create seamless connections between internal servers and clients outside, Microsoft originally introduced what was known as direct access. And that came out with Server 2008 R2 and Windows 7. So really interesting technology. It gave the ability not just to access internal resources without manually establishing a VPN, but also to manage the external clients with tools like Config Manager and Group Policy, even when they weren't on the internal network. So that particular technology evolved to what we have today as always-on VPN, which came out with Server 2016. And so most technologies for remote access or publishing of internal resources are based on the remote access server role in Windows Server. Now, the RAS role, or remote access server role, that's going to be a logical grouping of a lot of related networking technologies, like the remote access service, or RAS. You've got routing. So at one point it was called RRAS. And then you also had the web application proxy. And so these technologies are the roles of the remote access server role. So when you install the RAS role with the Add Roles and Features wizard or PowerShell, you can install one or more of those 3 role services. Okay. Now, when you install the direct access and VPN RAS role services, then you're deploying the remote access server gateway, and you can deploy the RAS gateway as a single tenant RAS gateway VPN server, a multi-tenant RAS gateway VPN server, and also as a direct access server, right? So for RAS gateway single tenant, by using the RAS gateway, you can actually deploy VPN connections to provide end users with remote access to your organization's network and the resources. So if your clients are running Windows 10 Pro and above, then you can deploy always-on VPN, maintaining a persistent connection between clients and your organization whenever remote computers are connected to the internet. You'll note, with this technology, it is always on VPN. So anytime there's an internet connection, that client is tied to our corporate environment via a VPN connection. So with RAS Gateway, you can also do a site-to-site VPN connection between 2 different servers at different locations, like between your local office and a branch office. You can take advantage of things like NAT as well. Also, RAS Gateway does support BGP, or Border Gateway Protocol. What is that used for? route propagation, route sharing. So dynamic routing services is also part of this RAS gateway. Now, if you look at a RAS gateway multi-tenant type environment, then you can deploy the RAS gateway as a multi-tenant software-based edge gateway and router when you're using Hyper-V network virtualization, or you have VM networks deployed with virtual LANs deployed. So with the RAS gateway, cloud service providers and enterprises can enable data center and cloud network traffic routing between virtual and physical networks, including out to the internet. So with the RAS gateway, your tenants can use point-to-site VPN connections to access their VM network resources in a data center from anywhere. And so when you hear the term point-to-site, that typically means a single system that is VPNing into an environment, not doing a site-to-site connection where you've got one RAS server communicating with another one or one VPN server communicating with another one. A point-to-site connection. So RAS gateway will allow for point-to-site VPN connections to access their VM network resources in a data center from anywhere. Also, you can provide tenants with site-to-site VPN connections between their remote site and your data center. Also, you can configure the RAS gateway with BGP for dynamic routing and even enable NAT for internet access for those VMs on your VM networks. And then once again, you've got always on VPN. And so that will enable remote users to securely access shared resources, intranet websites, and applications internally without having to fire off a VPN. Okay? Because the second that they have a internet connection, they are connected to the VPN. Now, VPNs are point-to-point connections across a private or public network like the internet, but a VPN client uses special TCP/IP or even UDP-based protocols known as tunneling protocols to make a virtual call to a virtual port on a VPN server. So in a typical VPN deployment, a client will initiate a virtual point-to-point connection to a remote access server over the internet, right? So that's typical VPN. And so then the remote access server will answer the call. It'll authenticate the caller and then transfers data between the VPN client and the organization's private network. So it'll act as that middleman there. Now, there are several different options for VPN clients. In Windows, the built-in plugin and the Universal Windows Platform VPN plugin platform are built on top of the Windows VPN platform. Okay, so for that built-in VPN client, it will support a number of tunneling protocols, such as IKE version 2, L2TP, and then that will ride across IPsec. You've got PPTP as well. That's an old school one right there. So that's your point-to-point tunneling protocol, and even supports SSTP. Note that SSTP is supported for Windows Desktop Edition only. Now, if you don't know which tunneling protocol to use, you can also choose automatic configuration of your VPN clients. And automatic means that the device will try each one of the built-in tunneling protocols until one of them succeeds. And so it's going to start with the most secure one and work its way down to the least secure. And so for that Universal Windows Platform VPN plugin, that was introduced in Windows 10, although there were some aspects of it in Windows 8, 8.1 as well. But using the UWP platform, third-party VPN providers can create app containerized plugins using the APIs, so therefore eliminating the complexity and the problems often associated with writing to system-level drivers. And so there are many Universal Windows Platform VPN applications like Pulse Secure, Cisco AnyConnect, you've got the F5 Access, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to use a UWP VPN plugin, work with the vendor for any custom settings that are needed to connect and configure that VPN solution. Now, what's this always on thing about? Well, always on VPN that came out with Windows 10. It allows users to stay connected to their internal network even when they're outside their company premises, or when they're connected to the internet in general. Now, unlike traditional VPNs that require a user to manually fire off a VPN connection, Always On automatically connects even before the user signs in if it's configured that way. Also, when the internet link fails, it reconnects automatically when there is a restore of the internet connection, and the user doesn't even have to be involved in it. So with this technology, users don't need to be concerned about initiating a VPN connection. Always On is set up so that users have a seamless access to external and internal resources, no matter where in the world they are. So it just as a reminder, Always On does succeed the direct access technology. And so while it provides almost the same experience as direct access, it brings on a simpler deployment and more flexibility for your clients. So you can initiate an Always On VPN connection even from Windows Home Edition computers. Always On VPN has mitigated most of the limitations of earlier VPN solutions and has expanded the VPN functionality beyond the capabilities of direct access or even traditional VPN. Now, Always On VPN can work both with domain and non-domain joined devices. So because it does support IKE version 2, SSTP, L2TP over IPsec, IPv4, and IPv6, it's pretty flexible. As both managed and unmanaged devices are supported to initiate Always On VPN connections, you can use conditional access and device compliance policies to make sure that a system has an acceptable level of security. You can also use new methods of authentication like Windows Hello for Business and MFA. And if you want to enable access to only some of the internal network, you can implement traffic filters and allow external access only to selected resources in the internal network. Always On VPN is exclusively part of Windows 10 and 11. Using other platforms would need to use a traditional client VPN solution. Note, you can't use ADDS or group policy to deploy and manage this particular feature. You do need to use Config Manager, Intune, or PowerShell for that. Windows Server 2022 and later with RAS installed will support the Always On VPN technology. But other network devices like from Cisco, Juniper, Palo Alto that can terminate VPN connections are also supported. Enabling clients for Always On VPN connections will require the deployment of an XML VPN profile, and it can be manually created or a configured client can generate a script or a template. And so that XML file can be deployed to clients using Intune, Config Manager, or PowerShell. So when it comes to deployment of this Always On VPN, okay, you do need to make sure your environment is ready to go. There are a variety of services that are part of it in order to make this happen. Okay, so when preparing for Always On VPN, make sure that you have ADDS ready to go, right? An Active Directory domain infrastructure, including one or more DNS servers. See, both internal and external DNS zones will be required, assuming that the internal zone is a delegated subdomain of the external zone. Right? Also, Active Directory-based EKI needs to be part of this. So that means you'll be utilizing ADCS, or Active Directory Certificate Services. You'll need a physical server, whether existing or new, to install what's known as NPS, or the Network Policy Server. Now, if you already have NPS servers on your network, then you can modify an existing NPS server configuration rather than adding another one. You also need to make sure you've got remote access as a RAS gateway VPN server with features to support IKE version 2 VPN connections and LAN routing. You need a perimeter network that has 2 firewalls. So ensure that your firewalls will allow traffic that's necessary for both VPN and radius communications to function properly. That remote access dial-in user service capability. You need a physical server or a VM on your perimeter network with 2 physical Ethernet network adapters to install RAS as a RAS gateway VPN server. VMs require VLANs for the host. And membership and administrators or equivalent is the minimum required in order to get it set up, and management platform of your choice for deploying the always-on VPN configuration. Okay. So nice little image there to kind of show you all those things that do need to be set up. Now let's talk a bit about device compliance. Device compliance. So we're going to describe how to use compliance and conditional access policies to help protect access to organization resources. So we're going to look at protecting access to resources using Intune. We'll explore device compliance policy. We will take a look at deploying a device compliance policy and even spend some time exploring and how to create a conditional access policy. Nope. Yeah, okay, good. There we go. So an important benefit of using MDMs, right, like using Intune for managing your devices, is that you can allow access to email and documents only from devices managed by MDM. You could put policies and rules in place to protect your environment, making sure that devices comply with company policy. See, company policies can include specifying that user passwords have to be complex, local data on devices has to be encrypted, the use of MFA is in place, latest updates are installed, right? So you can get very, very specific about how someone could tie in. For example, users can access Exchange Online mailbox from a device that meets the company policy, but they can't read their emails from a secondary device that doesn't have the latest updates installed. So if all other prereqs are met, well, then you can access a mailbox from a secondary device after installation of latest updates. Now, you can define company policies by using device security policy in Microsoft 365 or device compliance in Intune. So you can control access to email, documents, and other cloud apps by using conditional access policies. And compliance with company policy is just one criterion that you can specify and evaluate in a conditional access policy. You can also evaluate things like sign-in risk and device type, the location, the client apps, etc. Note that if a device isn't enrolled to Intune, its compliance cannot be evaluated. However, you can prevent access to mailboxes, documents, and cloud apps from devices that aren't enrolled. Now, if a user tries to access their mailbox from that device, depending on how you set up that policy, well, the user might be blocked from accessing those devices, or they may be redirected to enroll their device. So one of the things that we need to set up on these devices is what's known as a compliance policy. And this is going to be the rules that need to be configured on a device for it to be considered compliant. So after you configure and deploy it, then you can monitor the compliance status in the Intune portal. Now, before you can apply a compliance policy to a device, it has to be enrolled in Intune. And that's got to be the very first thing, right? It has to be enrolled. After it's enrolled, then it can be automatically added to a device group. And if a compliance policy is assigned to that group, well, then the policy will be assessed on the device with its compliance status automatically reported to Intune and displayed in the portal. And so device compliance policies will establish the necessary settings for things like password settings, encryption settings, whether it's jailbroken or rooted, a minimum and maximum operating system version, as well as a maximum mobile threat defense level. Okay? So when a device does get enrolled in Intune, then this information, including compliance status, is added to Entra ID, and the compliance policies are assigned to users rather than devices. So what's neat is conditional access policies will utilize the Entra information to either block or grant access to email or other organizational data. Now note, it's mandatory to use compliance policies in conjunction with conditional access. Compliance policies can be employed solely for reporting purposes if you wanted to. But compliance policies are created in the devices section in the Intune Admin Center. And then the device compliance dashboard is found under reports. You got to take advantage of both spots, right? Set them up under devices and then use the reports to view the dashboard. Intune does detect a device that is not compliant. It immediately marks the device as not compliant. And so in each compliance policy, you can configure actions for those non-compliant devices, giving you extra flexibility in deciding what to do. Like, for example, organizations are blocking access to the company resources from a non-compliant device, but you can configure a compliance policy that instead allows a non-compliant device to access company resources as long as the device is made compliant in a specified grace period. And so if compliance isn't achieved, well, then we're going to cut off access. Now, there are two different types of non-compliant actions, and one of them is notify the end user via email. Note that you can customize things like the recipients and the subject and the body, including the company logo and contact information. But Intune will include the details about the non-compliant device in that email notification. Also, the device can be marked non-compliant. So you can specify the number of days after which the device is marked as non-compliant. So this can be immediately after it's flagged as non-compliant, or you can give the user a grace period to make it compliant. And if it's not done in that window of time, well, then it's marked as non-compliant. And so device compliance can be used with or without conditional access. Okay? Although for greater strength, using it with conditional access can give you a lot more power and flexibility. And so Entra device groups can be used for policies. So it is recommended that you use Entra groups for users and devices to apply any type of policies that are implemented with Intune. And so you can create a group in Entra with dynamic membership by specifying a rule to determine membership based on either user or device properties. So when the attributes of a user or a device changes, well, then Entra ID evaluates all dynamic groups to see if the change would trigger any group adds or removes. Note that if a user or a device satisfies a rule on a group, well, then they're added into that group. If they no longer satisfy the rule, they are removed from the group. So just briefly here to deploy a device compliance policy. Excuse me. Note that you do need to have proper licensing, some prereqs here, proper licensing. Device needs to be run on a supported platform, and that would be an Android or Android Enterprise, iOS or iPad OS, a Mac OS box, and a newer Windows operating system. And that the device does need to be enrolled in Intune to be eligible for compliance management. And so you can deploy compliance policies to users in user groups or devices in device groups. So when a compliance policy is deployed to a user, all the user's devices are checked for compliance. Note it's recommended to deploy to device groups if the primary user didn't enroll the device. And so using device groups will help with compliance reporting. Now, when defining some of your general compliance settings, okay, you'll note here on the screen, we've got some general compliance settings. We're able to do things like marked devices, enabling marked devices with no policy assigned, right? And so you can mark them as either compliant or not compliant. So if a device doesn't have a compliance policy assigned, then the device is considered not compliant. And so by default, devices are marked as compliant. So if you use conditional access, recommend that you change the setting to not compliant. So if an end user isn't compliant because a policy isn't assigned, then the company portal lists no compliance policies have been assigned. Okay? So that's one thing to note. Also, enhanced jailbreak detection is something that is one of the general compliance settings. So when it's enabled, this causes iOS devices to check in with Intune more frequently. Okay, so it will use device location services. It may even impact battery usage too. Okay, so enabling the setting does require that you enable location services at the OS level, that you allow the company portal to use those location services, and that you evaluate and report its jailbreak status to Intune at least once every 72 hours. Otherwise, the device is not compliant. And the third one that's listed here, compliance status for devices that do not report. And so enter the time period that devices report the status for all compliance policies. And so by default, it's set to 30 days. If they go beyond that, boom, they are listed as non-compliant. Note that you can deploy compliance policies to users in user groups or devices in device groups. Let's talk briefly now about conditional access. Conditional access gives you policy-based granular access to resources, and it's really awesome. For me, anytime I'm talking to a client about how to secure their environment, conditional access is always the top of the list, right? So conditional access helps to protect company email and data from security risks that are posed by devices that are non-compliant and even by users. So Intune and Entra work together to enable conditional access for mobile devices. So Intune gives the information about device compliance with Microsoft Entra ID. When Entra receives that information from the device to access resources, it compares the information that comes from that device with the conditional access policy. Okay, if they're non-compliant and the policy is set to not allow non-compliant devices to access a resource, access denied. If access is denied, the user is prompted to enroll the device and fix the compliance problems. Okay. So pretty helpful there. Users can work from essentially anywhere on most devices so long as they do maintain compliance. Okay. But one of the things that you can do with conditional access is guide the users through fixing a denied access request. So if something does happen, then you can allow users to be provided with hints on how to bring themselves into compliance. Note some of the common scenarios for conditional access. Conditional access based on an app, right? So working with specific apps, or conditional access based on the network or the device trust. Okay, so a few different ways that conditional access can be set up. So we may only want our access to Microsoft 365 resources to take place on trusted devices, right? Or maybe if we're coming through on a untrusted network, we're going to require MFA. Okay, perhaps we want to, some applications requiring more protection than others, more sensitive data, right? Well, conditional access allows you to say, hey, if you're going to access this particular app, then you need to use MFA in order to get into that app. And so then creating those conditional access policies can be done pretty easily, right? So you can use conditions and then controls in order to create those conditional access policies. And so those conditions can be based on device platform, the location where the data is being accessed, and the client applications that are being used. In regards to the controls, it'll be either a block or allow, right? Block or grant. So a couple of different controls there. And then when it comes to configuring the conditional access, you can do that from the Intune console in the Intune Admin Center by opening conditional access and then under policies. And so when creating the policy, you assign it to the users or the groups that you specify for any cloud service that is going to be affected by that policy. Okay. And something else that we need to do, so if we're actually configuring all this fun stuff, well, we need to look at reports. Have to read the reports too. right? The reports are generated, but they're no good if nobody looks at them. So we're going to describe how to use Intune Power BI to help with creating those compliance and custom reports. And so Intune does have a lot of different options for creating and viewing those reports, a lot of out-of-the-box ones that are already contained in your Intune environment. And so we're going to have an opportunity to discuss now how to generate inventory and reports and compliance reports. We'll dig into reporting, monitoring device compliance, creating custom reports with the Intune data warehouse, and then using Graph API for building custom reports. And so let's start on generating inventory and compliance reports on report enrolled device inventory in Intune. Okay. So while Intune Admin Center doesn't include any reports specifically for inventory in the reports node, you can still report on all your devices and apps using the devices and apps tab. Okay. So to create and download a report for your devices, go to your devices and all devices, choose any columns that you want to look at in your view, filter it out however you want, and then one of the things you can do is export the data out. Okay, so you can download a report from the portal for all your devices and applications in a CSV format. Now you can view that report in Excel or some other tools. Okay. Also, when it comes to application reporting, the same sort of idea. Go under all apps, choose the columns you wish to see, export the report out. Okay, you can also download audit logs from Intune. That's going to give you a record of activities that generate a change in Intune. Any create, updates, deletes, assign actions, and things like that are all part of the audit logs. And it's a good idea to review those audit logs from time to time. Okay. And so for richer reports, take advantage, and if you don't want to pull it all into Excel, right, take advantage of Intune Data Warehouse and Power BI, right? Power BI. And plus you also get the Graph API as well that will help you with pulling out that Intune data. And so then you can create the reports using Power BI or Excel. And so then Intune does provide some built-in tools for reporting and monitoring compliance, right? So you get a nice look at how your devices are doing and being in compliance with the policies that you have. And those reports enable administrators to focus on situations and then take needed action. Note that device compliance reports are meant to be broad in nature and provide a more traditional reporting view of data to identify aggregated metrics. Okay, so when you're in the Intune Admin Center, look under the reports and device compliance, and sure enough, you'll be able to see device compliance settings in there. And in that report, it's going to show you all the compliance states for devices to give you a good broad view of the data, no matter how large the data set. And so it's going to show you the full breakdown of records in a visualization of aggregated metrics. Those reports can be generated by applying filters for compliance status, OS, type of ownership, etc. Okay, so you can get a little more specific there on that data. So then you can take a look at the Generate Report button. That's going to refresh all the data and show the latest state information all aggregated there for you. Building custom inventory reports. Okay, so you can use the Intune Data Warehouse to build professional looking reports that provide insight into your enterprise mobile environment. So things like looking at the trends of users enrolling in Intune so you can optimize license purchases. App and OS version breakdown so you can review the status of your devices, or even enrollment and device compliance trends so you can smoothly roll out any policy updates. Okay, and so the data warehouse itself gives you access to more information about your mobile environment than what's in the Intune Admin Center. So all this historical data is in there. The data is refreshed on a daily cadence and a data model using the OData standard. Okay, so you got a really nice environment there to help you out. Note you do have to be a global admin or an Intune service administrator. Okay, you also need to be a user with the role-based access to Intune data warehouse resources. And so then you can also take advantage of things like Power BI and Power BI Desktop to open up the data there. Okay, so once you've got Power BI, you copy a OData link and utilize that OData link to connect to the underlying data. One other thing that you could take a look at is accessing your data using the Graph API. And so the Microsoft Graph API for Intune enables programmatic access to Intune information for your tenant. Okay, I'm going to tell you, Graph API is where everything is, not just Intune. Everything is in Graph API, right? So spend some time as you're doing your research for your exam and for real world, spend some time understanding a bit about what you can extract from Graph API. So even though Graph is primarily used for programmatic access to your data in the cloud, it can be good for doing things like building automation scripts. Okay? So you can also use it to extract data from Intune and then further manipulate that data in your favorite analysis or reporting tool, like pulling specific data down and then dumping it into Power BI or putting it into a format that I can open it in Power BI or Excel or something like that. So for mobile device management scenarios, the Graph API for Intune supports standalone deployments, right? So Intune provides data into Graph the same way as all the other cloud services do, rich entity information and relationship navigation. So you could take advantage of using Microsoft Graph and the Graph Explorer to help you to extract the needed information from Microsoft Graph API. Okay, so what did we just spend some time with? Well, we talked about protecting identities in Entra. We discussed Windows Hello, and that allows organizations to implement two-factor authentication, providing an easier experience for authentication for users on devices that support your biometric sign-ins. Hello can be implemented in cloud, on-prem, and hybrid environments. And Entra ID protection will actively monitor authentications, evaluate circumstances, calculate potential risk like consecutive logins from distant locations. And Microsoft Entra ID also provides the ability for users to reset their own password, yet giving the administrators the ability to configure criteria required to complete the task. And you also get MFA. When it comes to enabling organizational access, we're familiar with VPN. And so clients can be configured for users to initiate a VPN connection, but always on makes things a lot easier. Okay? And so when a user tries to access resources requiring a VPN, always on is already on. And so they can now start using always on to access those internal resources. Always on is a feature of Windows Server. It can be deployed by setting up the necessary roles and services, including a network policy server, a certificate authority server or a CA, and a RAS or remote access server. In regards to implementing device compliance, we talked about device compliance policies, giving you that balance between preventing management policies from interrupting a user's experience, yet still ensuring devices are staying compliant with policy. And so administrators can set required policies like minimum OS version. If the device doesn't meet the policy, well, then a user could be provided some information on how to get into compliance. But rules can be put into place to determine when a device is non-compliant. If it's non-compliant, then some things will go into place to remove access to things. Lastly, here we discussed generating inventory and compliance report. And so Intune Admin Center does give you some basic information, can help you with creating reports like device compliance. But if you want more robust reporting, take advantage of Power BI to tie into the Intune data warehouse to build those reports. And then for a programmatic way to get to things, take advantage of the Microsoft Graph API. That'll help you to extract data and use it in an organization's existing reporting tool. At this point, we're going to take a 5-minute break. So we will see you back here in 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully that 5-minute break was good for you. All right. Well, let's keep on going then, shall we? Give me a quick second. And we'll do that, and then this. Okay. Get my screen turned back on here. Okay, so we're going to keep on going now, but this time we're going to talk about endpoint security. Endpoint security. Okay, now security. Microsoft invests a lot of money in security. And so in this particular learning path, we're going to talk about things like data protection and protecting the endpoints themselves against threats. We'll also cover some key capabilities of several of Microsoft Defender solutions that are out there. Okay. All right. So one of the first things that I need to mention is this thing called WIP, W-I-P, WIP. And so Windows Information Protection, or WIP, is going to be a set of technologies that protects your organization from accidental or malicious data leaks without significant changes to your enterprise environment or the apps themselves. So it provides this protection to both enterprise-owned devices as well as BYOD. And it does so without interfering with employees' regular workflow. And so in a modern work environment, with the growth in the number of mobile devices and personal devices, this protection is needed more than ever. So one of the key tasks for a modern desktop admin is to manage desktop protection on all types of devices. And so the module that we're going to be getting into now is going to consider how to use Intune to create and manage WIP policies that do manage this protection. Okay, and so we're going to be talking a bit about this now. Okay, let's see here. One moment. Okay. So let's talk a bit about deploying this device data protection now. And so we're going to talk about WIP, right? We're going to explore it. We're going to plan WIP. We'll implement and use WIP itself and how it's used. We'll also talk about EFS on a Windows client and also this thing called BitLocker, right? So we'll explore BitLocker as well. Now, when it comes to WIPs, in modern enterprises, we've got so many devices, we've got so many ways that a system can be exploited, and man, it's getting challenging, isn't it? So traditionally, enterprises have controlled access to data by assigning credentials to users and then configuring permissions and access control lists on those resources. But user access control doesn't prevent authorized users from accidentally sharing files or sending data in emails. That means we need some other sorts of protections. So most technologies based on authentication and authorization for protection are going to be location dependent, meaning that they usually work only while the data is in a company controlled environment. But organizations can look at things like DLP, data loss prevention, and IRM, information rights management. In conjunction with DLP, organizations can use DLP systems to overcome the limitations of systems based on just authentication and authorization. See, a DLP system detects and even controls the data that should be protected and provides a way to protect the data itself no matter where it lives. So a DLP does require rules to identify and categorize data that does need protection. Also, the software apps like Exchange or SharePoint to scan the data to see if it matches the rules, and a way to define what actions that must be carried out when that data is discovered that matches a rule. So the challenge of DLP is that there's more rules, and so the more rules you create, the more likely workers will feel like the system is preventing them from getting work done. And users will try to find a way to go around it. So they might start sharing data by emailing links to an unprotected system instead of attaching files to an email system that contains those DLP protection policies. But despite improvements to DLP and SharePoint Online and Exchange, like allowing users to override rules, it still can interfere with normal workflow. Now, we also have what's known as IRM, or Information Rights Management. And so enterprises need to protect data after it leaves the company. And so systems that are based on IRM are used to make protection an inherent part of the document itself. So an employee can create a document and then determine the level of protection that should apply to the document, like preventing unauthorized users from opening the document. Note that in some scenarios, protection can also be applied automatically based on any conditions that the administrator applies. But IRM systems do require setting up both client and server environments. And the client app that opens a document is responsible for processing protection rules after checking with the server components of the system to check for authorization updates. Now, note neither IRM nor DLP is sufficient in a scenario where an organization or an employee leaves the organization with a personal device or simply decides that they no longer want to allow organization to manage their personal device. The best case option in this case is to delete organization data from the personal device. So protection systems implemented in Microsoft 365 allow for you to do that very thing. Those systems allow you to create rules based on which apps can access organizational data and also allow you to decide which data that those apps can access. Azure RMS, or Rights Management Services, extends protection for data beyond a user's device through an IRM, Information Rights Management System, that integrates with WIP. Okay? And so Intune allows control over the actions that are protected, that can be done with that protected data, even outside of the organization. Plus, apps can tell the difference between organization and personal data. Those are known as enlightened apps. Enlightened apps. So this allows you to apply WIP rules on organization-owned data only, yet leaving personal data alone. So for example, an employee can safely use Word on a personal device for both business and personal without losing their personal data should they leave the organization. And so when planning for WIP, of course, you've got several benefits that go into it, right? Separating work and personal data, like we talked about, protecting your line of business applications as well, so you can add protections without having to modify the app. You could do a selective wipe, removing corporate data without messing with personal data. You can also configure audit reporting. And so WIP will give you the ability to track and even report on policy issues and actions performed in response to policy violations. And management system integration here, you'll note it works with Intune, with Config Manager, with other MDMs as well. And so notice some scenarios that are listed here. Encrypting the data on a device. So when you're copying or downloading organizational data from SharePoint or OneDrive or network shares or something like that, the WIP will encrypt the data on the device, even if the device is personally owned. Okay. This also allows for you to control which apps can access corporate data. Okay, so apps you've included in the allowed apps list can access the organizational data, but other apps that aren't on the list may have more limited capabilities. So for example, if the policy is set to override mode, then when a user tries to copy data from an allowed app to a personal app, they're going to get a warning notice that will ask for confirmation to perform a potentially unsafe action. You've got enlightened apps that are part of this as well, so they know the difference between personal and corporate data. This will also allow for you to prevent the use of personal apps and services. Okay, so you can prevent accidental release of organizational data to public spaces, social media, by preventing users from using applications that are personal to them. Okay. And one last thing that's listed here, remove corporate data from lost or stolen devices or devices that are owned by ex-employees. Okay? So easy enough, you can remove organizational data from and unenroll any devices that are enrolled in Intune from these types of scenarios. So when it comes to implementation and use of WIP, see, when you use WIP, then organizational data automatically gets encrypted when it's downloaded to or opened on a local device. And that encryption protects that data on the device itself, helping to ensure your data that's corporate-based is going to stay safe. Okay? And so WIP policies will allow you to specify which trusted apps can use and manipulate data. Okay? So that can help you to choose which apps are going to be deemed as protected, right? And which ones are going to be allowed to work with our corporate data. Okay. Now, notice you can set 4 WIP protection modes for managing access. One of them is listed as block or hide overrides. And so this will prevent employees from performing data sharing actions when blocked by policy. Okay. Many times this is also referred to as hide overrides mode. You can also choose to allow overrides, and that's going to warn employees when they're performing a potentially risky action, but they can choose to complete the action, and then that action gets logged into an audit log. You also have silent. So it works a lot like the allow overrides mode, except for it only records the action that an employee can override into the audit log. So any action that would be blocked still gets blocked. And the last one here is off, meaning WIP is turned off. It doesn't protect any data. Okay, so in Intune, you can get these WIP policies turned on. And so under the Intune Admin Center, under apps, you can look at app protection policies and then get those app protection policies configured, including choosing the protected apps that you want in the list. Okay, and so there could be apps of type recommended, and so enlightened apps that work with WIP. You can say it's a store app. You can also pinpoint desktop apps. Now, rule templates are used when adding apps to the allowed apps list in WIP. Corporate identity, network parameter, and even a data recovery agent certificate are going to be important aspects of the WIP configuration for the policy there. And so just a little idea about DRAs. If you are working with encryption and let's say something happens to your encryption key and it gets lost or something like that, or even revoked, you can't recover the data that's been encrypted. So you have to specify what's known as a DRA, or a data recovery agent certificate. Okay, so if the encryption key that you're using is lost or revoked, then if there's a DRA certificate, you can provide that public key that will encrypt the local data drive, which means that you can then later unencrypt that data. Okay, so typically with the DRA, it'll be tied to a person or a service, and then that certificate can be used. Excuse me. Now, there are other sorts of WIP settings that you can configure as well, like revoking encryption keys on unenroll, showing the Windows information protection icon overlay. Okay, so whether or not that's going to show up in File Explorer in the Save As view, so that someone knows that WIP is on there. Using Azure RMS for WIP, you have to be using Azure RMS and have that already configured and ready to go in order to use that. And using Windows Hello for Business as a method for signing into Windows. So if you're going to allow that sort of thing. Now, we also have what is known as EFS. And EFS came out long ago, since I believe it was Windows 2000 that introduced EFS. This is the encrypting file system, built-in encryption tool in the Windows file system, and it's a Windows-based systems, and it's tied to NTFS. Okay, advanced standard cryptographic algorithms allow transparent file encryption and decryption. So it allows encrypted files to be shared with other users, meaning you add them into EFS. And so some common usage scenarios for EFS would be like protecting files on shared computers. Okay, so because it's tied to the encryption is tied to the individual that encrypted the file, then anybody else, let's say you're using a shared computer, well, anybody else that uses that computer is not the user that encrypted the file. Therefore, they won't have access to those EFS files. You'll also note protecting files from access by privileged users. That's another thing, right? So this is classified data. Somebody may sign in as a privileged user because their certificate is not tied to EFS on that particular file. They will not be able to access that file, or even limiting file access to specific users, right? So you can add those certificates for those users on that file, and now they can decrypt that file as well. And so when it comes to managing the EFS certificates, EFS does use a public key cryptography to encrypt the files. And so EFS will obtain the keys from a user's EFS certificate that might also contain private key information, so manage them properly. But users do need asymmetric key pairs to encrypt the data, and they can actually get those keys from a CA, right? So a certificate authority. So if we already have, let's say, an internal, or maybe we're already working with a third-party CA, we can get a certificate from them, or they can generate their own, right? They can generate their own keys. So Windows can generate a key pair for them. Note that those keys will have a lifespan of 100 years. Okay, so if you get them from a CA, the time span is much, much shorter. But the ones generated by Windows gives you 100 years on those keys. Note that this method is more difficult than using a CA because there's no centralized management, and users are basically responsible for their own keys. Okay, but then they can get a certificate as well for a DRA. So before using EFS, make sure you have a DRA, or that data recovery agent certificate, at your disposal to get plugged in there. Okay, that certificate is used in scenarios when the one that encrypted the file can't or doesn't want to decrypt that particular file. Okay, so good old EFS, when a user who possesses the key opens a file, then the file opens. If they don't possess the key, they get an access denied message, right? So pretty nice because it is encrypted. And so some EFS features in Windows 10, you'll note that it does support, can be turned on or enabled through group policy, right? So there are some group policy settings for EFS, right, to get it configured. But one of the big ones that's part of that is also configuring a DRA. But you can use group policy to control and configure EFS protection policies centrally for the enterprise. You've got per user encryption for offline files. So you can use EFS to encrypt offline copies of files from remote servers. So when that's turned on, then each file in the offline cache is going to be encrypted with the public key of the user that cached the file. EFS is applied to those offline files. So only that user has access to the file. Even local admins can't read it. And then selective wipe. So a feature of Windows in a corporate environment is selective wipe. So if the device is stolen or lost, an administrator can revoke the EFS key that was used to protect the files. No key, no access, right? So selective wipe comes into play with this as well. All right, we also have BitLocker. And so BitLocker provides disk level, disk volume protection, including operating system and data volumes. Note that BitLocker does use a TPM. And so if we're using Windows 11 boxes, we already have a TPM in the box. And so this is a way to check that early boot file integrity has been maintained. And it enhances protection to help mitigate offline software attacks. So should someone steal the disk and plug it in, well, because the TPM is going to be different, they can't get into it. So it will lock the disk, right? It's undecryptable at that point. So both BitLocker and EFS will provide encryption. And so EFS does it at the file and folder level. BitLocker will do it on the volume or disk level. And yes, you can use both together if you wanted to. BitLocker to Go will also extend BitLocker support to any removable storage devices, like to a thumb drive. Now, something else we need to talk about is this thing called Defender for Endpoint. Defender for Endpoint. Okay, so MDE, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Okay. And so some things we'll discuss with Defender for Endpoint. Yes, this is an additional product that does need to be purchased. Right? This can be part of your Defender XDR purchase, but we're going to talk about Defender for Endpoint for additional protection and monitoring for our devices against threats. So we'll discuss the Defender for Endpoint, key capabilities that are part of it, the Defender application control and device guard, application guard, exploit guard, and even system guard. Look at all those guards that we're going to be talking about right now. Okay. So let's start off with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. And so this Defender for Endpoint is going to be there to help enterprise networks prevent, detect, investigate, and respond to threats and advanced threats. Now, unlike Defender, that's on a Windows computer and managed by a group policy or Intune, Defender for Endpoint is a whole new platform that helps administrators enhance the security and establish centralized security control over both cloud and on-prem resources. Now, although Microsoft Defender for Endpoint does share the same name as Defender and Windows, they're not the same product. So don't confuse the two. Right? Administrators can use Defender for Endpoint to help monitor Defender functionality on the local computers to help maintain consistent configuration and also that an acceptable security level is maintained as well. But besides that, Defender for Endpoint integrates with the rest of the Defender suite. Okay? Part of your Defender for Endpoint environment is that there are a variety of different technologies that go into it. For example, there are endpoint behavioral sensors. And so those are embedded in Windows, and those sensors collect and process behavioral signals from the operating system, then send that data back to your private isolated cloud instance of Defender for Endpoint. Okay, so you can actually see what's going on that box. In regards to cloud security analytics, you've got big data, machine learning, and unique Microsoft optics across the Windows ecosystem, across the Microsoft 365 environment, and even with online assets. So behavioral signals get translated into insights, detections, and recommended responses to advanced threats. And this could be for your data, but this also applies globally. Microsoft is processing trillions of signals per day to come up with good security techniques. And then you have threat intelligence. So generated by Microsoft hunters and security teams, this will allow for you to identify attacker tools, techniques, procedures, and even generate alerts when those are observed in collected sensor data. And so some key capabilities of Defender for Endpoint, we have what's known as ASR, or Attack Surface Reduction. And so this attack surface reduction will be that set of capabilities that provides the first line of defense in the stack. So by ensuring configuration settings are properly set and exploit mitigation techniques are applied, then the set of capabilities resists attacks and exploits. So things like hardware-based isolation is a piece of this. Application control, network protection, network firewall, all of these components are part of that attack surface reduction. For next generation protection, to further reinforce the security perimeter of your network, Defender for Endpoint will use next generation protection designed to catch all types of emerging threats. And so you've got the Defender antivirus that's part of that for near instant detection and blocking of new and emerging threats, always on scanning, and a dedicated protection update that's based on machine learning, human and automated big data analysis, and in-depth threat resistance research. So you find regularly you're getting updates there. You have endpoint detection and response, or EDR. you'll typically see it called. And those are implemented to detect, investigate, and respond to advanced threats that may have surpassed the first two security pillars. Right? So Defender for Endpoint will offer endpoint detection and response capabilities that detect advanced attacks in near real time. So allowing security analysts to prioritize alerts, uncover the extent of a breach, and even take necessary response actions to help remediate the threat. You've got good old AIR, auto investigation and remediation. Okay, so with being able to quickly respond to advanced attacks, the Defender for Endpoint will offer automatic investigation and remediation capabilities to help reduce the volume of alerts in minutes at scale. So the Defender for Endpoint service has a whole wide breadth of visibility on multiple machines. And with that kind of optics, then the service generates a multitude of alerts. Well, the volume of alerts generated can be challenging for individuals. And so to address the challenge, sure enough, you've got AIR, automated investigations. And that's going to significantly reduce the number of alerts that need to be looked at individually. You have a secure score, right? So secure score allows for you to see your security posture and help you to see ways to improve the security posture of your organization, giving you visibility into the overall security posture of the organization. You have advanced hunting, where you can use queries to help you out in hunting for possible threats across the organization using that search and query tool. You can also create your own custom detection rules based on queries that you create to help surface any alerts in the Microsoft 365 Security Center. Then you also have management and APIs. And so integrating Microsoft Defender for Endpoint into workflows is a great idea. See, Defender for Endpoint will support a wide variety of options to make sure that customers can easily adopt the platform, because it has granular control to fit varying environments and requirements. So you have a bunch of different tools that are part of Defender for Endpoint. And as was mentioned, that was it is part of the Defender stack of tools. You have as well what's known as Windows Defender Application Control and Device Guard. Application Control is well suited for things like point of service, like sales terminals, ATMs, and devices like that. But Windows Defender Application Control, instead of assuming all apps are trustworthy, apps must earn a trust in order to be run. Okay, so application control moves away from that traditional trust model to one where apps have to prove their trustworthiness. And so for that to function properly, the executables have to be checked and verified using code signatures from software publishers. But some executables may need proper signatures, and so to address that, an admin can create a list of all unsigned code files on a system and then have the organization sign it. Okay. So signed or manifest of acceptable executables will be part of application control as well. Device Guard combines the features of application control with the ability to use Hyper-V hypervisor to protect Windows kernel mode processes against the injection and execution of malicious or unverified code. Note that you do have to have the proper hardware to support Device Guard. You also have Application Guard, right? And so that's designed to help prevent old and newly emerging threats and attacks to keep employees productive, right? So protecting against those things. And so using a hardware isolation approach, the goal of Application Guard is to destroy the playbook that attackers use by rendering current attack methods obsolete. Okay. And so it's designed for Windows and Edge. It helps to isolate enterprise-defined untrusted sites, protecting your company while your employees can browse the internet. So as an enterprise admin, you define what is among the trusted websites, cloud resources, and internal networks. Note that not everything on your list is considered untrusted, right? But rather it's considered trusted. So if it's not on the list, it's an untrusted. Okay, so if an employee does go to an untrusted site, then Edge opens the site in an isolated Hyper-V enabled container. separate from the host operating system. And that container isolation means that if the untrusted site turns out to be malicious, the host is protected and the attacker can't get to enterprise data. Okay. Note that you do need to have hardware that supports this sort of environment in order to allow for this to be configured. Exploit guard. Okay. It's a set of host intrusion prevention capabilities for Windows, so you can manage and reduce the attack surface of your apps and that are used by your employees. And so the key features are things like exploit protection. So mitigation techniques that are in place for apps that your organization uses. Right. So those can be turned on. Once those features are enabled, you now have the exploit protection capabilities. For attack surface reduction, so this will help reduce the attack surface of your apps with intelligent rules that stop vectors used by Office, script, and mail-based malware. Note it does require the Defender antivirus in order to work. For network protection, so that will extend the malware and social engineering protection that's offered by Defender Smart Screen in Edge to cover network traffic and connectivity on your organization's devices. It does require Defender antivirus. And the last one that's here on the list, controlled folder access. And so this will protect files in key system folders from changes by malicious and suspicious apps, including file encrypting ransomware. It can also block disk sectors as well. This also requires Defender antivirus to work. So when taking a look at System Guard, right? So Windows uses containers to help isolate sensitive system services and data, and they can stay secure even if the OS has been compromised. And so Windows uses that container type called a Defender System Guard to protect those critical resources, like the authentication stack, your single sign-on tokens, your biometric stack, your virtual trusted platform module. Right? All of these things get protected in containers in Windows. And so your Defender System Guard will reorganize the existing Windows system integrity features in one system and set up the next set of investments in security. So this will help protect and maintain the integrity of the system as it starts, also as it's running, and helps to ensure the system integrity has truly been maintained through local and remote attestation. Okay, so there's a whole lot to getting this set up, but it can help protect that operating system. Okay, now how about managing the Defender in Windows clients? Okay, let's take a look at this now. So we're going to talk about this Windows Security Center. We'll also discuss Defender Credential Guard, antivirus, and firewall capabilities. So first thing we have is the Windows Security Center. Probably familiar with that if you've been using Windows for a while. This will allow you to see security at a glance, see what's going on with the security features on the Windows system, and will allow you to look at things like your virus and threat protection. So all your antivirus, anti-malware stuff, your account protections, to configure account sign-in options, as well as hello and dynamic lock. You have firewall and network protection that you can take a look at to see the different profiles for your firewall, getting that configured. Your app and browser control, so you can configure Defender Smart Screen to protect the device by checking for unrecognized apps and files that are on the internet. Device security, so you can find out about processor core isolation, processor security, TPM, secure boot features. Your device performance and health, to show if your Windows is current, right? And to identify potential issues that could impact the overall health of the device. You have family options for things like parental controls and any protection history. So this is part of Windows 11. So This will list any recent threats and any recommended actions. Now, one of the tools that we have at our disposal as well is what's known as Credential Guard. Came out with Windows 10, Enterprise, and Server 2016. This is a virtualization-based security to help restrict access to sensitive information, thereby allowing only privileged system software to access it. And so credential theft attacks can occur due to unauthorized access to secrets. And so by safeguarding things like NTLM password hashes and Kerberos ticket granting tickets, domain credentials, Windows Defender Credential Guard can thwart those types of attacks. And so Credential Guard will provide the following features and solutions, one of them being platform security features to protect credentials. So things such as hardware security, NTLM, Kerberos, Credential Manager will take advantage of the platform security features, including things like secure boot and virtualization in order to protect those credentials. Virtualization-based security. So NTLM and Kerberos-derived credentials and other secrets will run in a protected environment isolated from the operating system. And better protection against advanced persistent threats. So credential theft attacks and techniques and tools are blocked when Credential Manager, domain credentials, your NTLM, your Kerberos-derived credentials are protected using virtualization-based security. So malware may run on the operating system with administrative privileges, but they can't extract the secrets that are protected in those virtualization-based security environments. So Windows Defender Credential Guard does offer strong protection. Advanced persistent threats may still adapt. So make sure you use Credential Guard with Device Guard to help protect your environment. We also have Microsoft Defender Antivirus, very powerful tool. It works very, very well. It integrates very well with other Microsoft tools in the Microsoft ecosystem, but the Defender Antivirus will help to protect your computer from spyware, malware, and viruses, and is also Hyper-V aware, which is great to know. When it comes to the Defender Antivirus tool, you could choose to run a quick, full, or custom scan. You could even choose to block out or exclude processes from your scan. One of the awesome features of working with the Defender antivirus is the fact that it maintains a real-time scan. And so, and you're not going to notice really any negative impact due to that real-time scan. You can configure the Defender antivirus locally on the box if you want, or you can also go through Intune and Configuration Manager to set up the environment for Defender antivirus. Some additional features you have is like block at first sight. So that allows Microsoft Defender Antivirus to rapidly identify and block new malware. Note that you do turn that on through group policy, but when it's enabled, both cloud-based protection and automatic sample submission get turned on as well. And then detect and block potentially unwanted apps, yet another feature, right? It can be used to block unwanted software during download and installation times. So for example, you could block software that is bundled with other downloads, like advertisement injection software, driver and registry optimizers. The detect and block potentially unwanted apps feature is available to enterprise users whose client infrastructure you manage by using either Intune or Config Manager. We have a Windows Defender Firewall, very robust firewall environment. You can access the settings through the Security Center and Control Panel to do these things locally. You can also configure basic Defender Firewall settings through that Security Center. Note, you cannot configure all Defender Firewall settings in the Security Center. Some of these settings will open the Defender Firewall page in Control Panel. Okay? But for Windows computers enrolled in Intune or joined to Entra, you can use Intune to help manage the settings for firewall. Okay, and that's part of the endpoint protection device configuration profile that you could set up. Okay. Now, there are 3 different types of network location profiles that can be set up, one of them being domain, another one being private, right? So it's not on the public network, but it's private. And then the other one being a guest or a public network. So, someone goes to Starbucks, right? Well, that's part of a public network. You can configure how firewall is going to be working there. And Windows Defender Firewall can display notifications on the taskbar, right? So that is a capability there. So you've got firewall. You also have what's known as Windows Firewall with advanced security. So if you want to get down to the nitty gritty and set up all of the little aspects granularly, right? You can do that. And that's the idea behind Windows Firewall with advanced security. Those settings can be configured through group policy as well, using the advanced settings features. And so you can configure things like the firewall state, inbound and outbound connections, and what to do if firewall rules aren't matched, protected network connections, okay? Any logging that needs to be configured. That's all part of what you can configure with Windows Defender Firewall with advanced security. Let's talk a bit about Defender for Cloud Apps, right? Defender for Cloud Apps. And so we'll discuss the Defender for Cloud Apps tool, planning for Defender for Cloud Apps, and then even implementing Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Okay. So first things first, this Defender for Cloud Apps thing, what is it? Well, Defender for Cloud Apps is a CASB, right? So it's a cloud access security broker. And so it works with advanced features for extensive visibility and control, along with sophisticated analytics to detect and mitigate cybersecurity threats. And so what's the purpose of a CASB? Well, a CASB gives you insights into what goes on with your web-based applications, your web apps, your SaaS apps, your platform as a service apps. And so this is going to also give you the granular visibility and control over the user activities and sensitive data that goes into working with those different types of environments. So that means that you can enforce enterprise security policies, excuse me, even broker access and monitor your user activities. Note that CASBs do offer a whole bunch of different capabilities that are associated with them, but they'll include things like visibility. So a CASB can detect all cloud services and assign them a risk rating. You've got data security. So CASBs can also provide data security through working with things like DLP and responding to sensitivity labels on content. They'll also provide threat protection. So they can work with adaptive access control, user and entity behavior analysis, as well as malware mitigation. And then for compliance, your CASBs can assist with compliance efforts by supplying reports and dashboards that demonstrate cloud governance and help to conform to data residency and regulatory compliance requirements. So when it comes to using these CASBs, you do need to plan for them. Okay? So by using Defender for Cloud Apps, you can enjoy the advantage of cloud apps, yet still retain control over your corporate resources. That's typically what organizations find, is that they lose control when users start working with cloud-based applications. So, but there are prereqs for getting things put together. In order for your organization to be in compliance for licensing, you have to have a license for every user protected by Defender for Cloud Apps. Okay, so every user has to have a license, and then after you have a license, you'll receive an email with an activation information and a link to the Defender for Cloud Apps portal. Once you set up the Defender for Cloud Apps environment, note you do need to be a GA or a security admin in Entra or Office 365 in order to finish the setup process of this whole thing. And then to run the Defender for Cloud Apps portal, use Edge, right? But the latest versions of Chrome, Firefox, or Safari can work as well. When you start working with the Defender for Cloud Apps environment, then you'll be able to do things like instant visibility, right? So you can start seeing what you have out there already. So you can set the visibility, protection, and governance actions for your apps. And when it comes to governance actions, that'll be things like, are we going to sanction or unsanction, meaning it's not approved, that particular application. Then you can protect sensitivity information with DLP policies. So once you go in and you get things starting to be configured, then you go to settings, under information protection, turn on file monitoring, and that can help to work with Microsoft Purview information protection. Okay, so this is a tool that can work with your Purview environment. Step 3, you'll want to control cloud apps with policies, right? Control cloud apps with policies. So start making your policies. Number 4, set up cloud discovery. This is going to be a big one. And so you can start grabbing log information from things like Zscaler and things like that. Okay. So you do have log collectors and that need to be configured for that. Step 5, deploy conditional access app control for your catalog apps. Okay, so using that in conjunction with CASB solutions can actually give you some good security, or depending on how it's put together, may mean it's being proxied twice. So be careful with how you configure these. Number 6, get things personalized, right? So adding your organization details, email, admin notifications, score metrics as well for the apps. And number 7, organize the data according to your needs. So doing IP address tags, adding in domains so that your reports will look right. Okay. Oof, lots of stuff, huh? And so what did we cover right now? Well, with this particular learning path, we looked at deploying device data protection. So authentication is great. Authorization is great. What if somebody still signs in, right? Doesn't protect them against the unauthorized use of your data. And so WIP is there. Windows Information Protection helps to protect that data, like whether or not the data is in a document or in an email. And rules can be created automatically to classify and then protect your data based on criteria. Also, for data protection, we have EFS, we have BitLocker for encryption. Managing Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Defender for Endpoint is that comprehensive platform that centralizes your security management across the cloud and on-prem resources with behavioral sensors, analytics, threat intelligence to help administrators to identify potential issues on a box. Okay. Then we have managing Microsoft Defender in Windows clients, right? So we've got the Defender platform there, the Defender antivirus, we've got the Defender firewall. And so to ensure proper configuration, those features should be managed centrally within organizations. So you can use things like group policy and things like that to help you out. Lastly, Defender for cloud apps to help maintain control over apps that are in the cloud. Okay. And so this will give you a great idea of what you have currently running, and then your ability to also control access to those very things. So you do have some labs and other things to work on, but at this point, this will conclude day 3 of the MD-102 Microsoft 365 Endpoint Administrator course. Thank you very much and have a good day.